Don't worry, parents, if your child talks back, misbehaves, or seems unmanageable at times, you are not alone. Joining us to share more is Dr. Rob Robinson, Clinical Director of Family Care Counseling Associates in Wilbraham. Dr. Robinson, we love when you're here. You give great advice to us.
Great to be back.
And we're talking to parents or anyone, a caregiver, anyone who takes care of kids.
Right.
Now, we all know meltdowns happen.
Yes.
And they can be frustrating. They're common.
Normal. Meaning common. They're not fun.
They're not fun. But
no,
the thing
in
that
public.
Parents need to realize, exactly in public, not all children are alike.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we're going to talk later in the show about techniques to manage misbehavior. But I think the important thing for parents to realize is that, you know, not all kids are alike. I mean, there's a lot of temperamental variability just by the emotional set points that kids are born with. I mean, the neurophysiology or the hardwiring of a child, you know, largely determines a lot of what happens with children. And some parents, you know, some parents are lucky to be able to raise easy to raise children. I mean, these kids are, you know, basically kids that are, you know, easily installed into patterns, and they have, you know, waking and sleeping cycles that are pretty much the same. Everybody loves to be around them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go to open houses and the teachers are saying, what a marvelous kid. You know, they really are temperamentally easy to raise. And then some parents deal with kids that are very timid and shy, where they have a lot of social anxiety. They tend to be reluctant to do new things. They kind of will be kids that might hide behind the parent, not say very much. And then there are parents that have very challenging children to raise just because of the neurodevelopmental variability. I mean, they can be highly rigid. They may not be adaptable. There's no flexibility. You know, they don't easily fall into patterns. They could be very fussy in terms of, you know, how they eat and how they need to be held a lot. They may be difficult to manage sometimes in the classroom. And I think it's important to realize that, you know, when people like myself, therapists and others, you know, talk about, you know, child rearing, you know, it's not a level playing field.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's dealing with a different person, and you never want to imply that just because you throw some techniques out here that, you know, all the issues should go away. Not all children are alike, and some parents have their hands full with kids that may be physiologically more difficult.
It's nice to hear that too, because I think parents tend to feel guilty. What did I do wrong? Am I not doing the right thing? You know, am I not being the parent that I should be? But a lot of times you could be doing all the right things, whatever those right things are. And even still, like you said, it's just you just have a kid that's not necessarily easy to raise.
That's right. And when you're dealing with a challenging child neurophysiologically that may have psychological, you know, issues or neurological issues, I mean, there's a whole different set of strategies and techniques they have to rely on. And the ones we're talking about today are just the things that you can kind of lay over most children, you know, dealing with misbehavior. But I did want to make sure that people understood that it's not all the same with every kid.
And I think a lot of parents ask, what is wrong with them? You know, I don't know, I'm not understanding, I'm not sure what's going on. So maybe parents need to make sure they're asking themselves the right questions to make sure that they're not losing their mind and to make sure that they know how to manage their children. So it's all about knowing what questions to ask and how to manage these difficult situations. So give us a little tease what we're going to talk about later in the show.
I think, you know, one of the things that's really important is to understand misbehavior in the context that it occurs. So the question, the more important question is not why is this kid doing this, but what's the purpose? What's the goal? You know, what are they trying to achieve? Mm-hmm. And when you're on to them and you understand the goal and you know how to pick out what the goal is, then you can stop cooperating with inadvertently stop cooperating with the misbehavior, because parents don't understand they may be playing a role in the context that it occurs to encourage the misbehavior.
Right, and they may not even realize it. So you're going to give us some techniques, parents, techniques to help with that misbehavior, and hopefully maybe not totally change it, but make life a little easier for parents.
They should never have another problem ever after this show.
You're unbelievable. My goodness. Changing lives. Thank you so much. We'll be with you in just a bit.
Okay.
And later, Dr. Robinson's going to share the 4 goals of misbehavior. We are back with Dr. Rob Robinson. We're talking about misbehaving children and the techniques that we can use to help understand where that misbehavior is coming from. So earlier we talked about how all kids are different. No two kids are alike.
No, that's right. That's right. They're all wired differently.
Right.
But this strategy about identifying the 4 goals is not a new one. It was actually introduced first by a guy by the name of Rudolf Dreikurs years ago, where he was just observing children behavior in classrooms and playgrounds and just as they played, and he began to notice that kids actually misbehave with intention. That there's a purpose to it, and that if you can identify what the purpose is, then you might be able to do something about not cooperating with it. So, he studied the behavior, and he was able to identify 4 goals in misbehavior. And so one of those things, for example, is misbehaving for the goal of power, which is basically about trying to convince teachers and parents that no one can boss me around. And that can be active and passive, by the way. Mm-hmm. So you can have active mispower goal by saying, no, I'm not going to do it, or passive, where they just sit there and just don't do what they're told.
Right.
And then another one is attention. Misbehaving for the goal of attention. Basically, doing things to get everybody around the child to pay attention to them. That I can only belong by making sure that everybody's paying attention to me.
So let's use it as an example, Dr. Robinson.
Yes.
So let's say that is their goal. They want attention.
Right.
They're acting out. So the parent, what do? They give them attention. They say, what's wrong? Or they yell, or they reprimand.
Yeah.
So you're really giving them exactly what they want. Which would that encourage it then?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if a child's misbehaving for attention, for example, you're on the phone, you're telling the child, can you knock it off? I'm on the phone, right? The kid stops temporarily, starts misbehaving again. You say, can you please stop? I'm on the phone. All the while trying to get the parent's attention, and the parent stopping and paying attention to that over and over again feeds the misbehavior. Just like the goal of power. I mean, one of the things that probably isn't a good idea is when the kid's misbehaving for power goals, you don't want to argue with your child. It just reinforces the goal of acting out for the goal of power.
Right.
And they resist what you're saying.
So what is the technique that we as parents can use to understand these goals?
Yes.
And then hopefully our children will misbehave less and less.
All right, so the best way is to identify how you feel in response to the misbehavior. So if you feel like your authority is being challenged, that's usually a goal of power. If you feel annoyed, it's typically attention.
Attention.
If you feel like you're hurt, it's because they're misbehaving for the goal of seeking revenge because they felt hurt about something. Or fear of failure is where you really actually feel like kind of giving up on what you're trying to teach the child, which could be like loading the dishwasher and then having them, break the dishes and then claiming that they just don't get it. And then so you do it for them. It really is identifying how you feel and then what the child does after you attempt to correct the misbehavior. If you know what the goal is, then you can stop cooperating with it.
Right. So like instead of saying, can you stop talking to them on the phone, ignore them altogether. Yep. Don't give them attention. Don't give them what their goal is.
Correct.
Therefore, then they will
stop the conversation and say, listen, if you interrupt one more time, you're going to be in timeout till the conversation's over. And then once you've given that choice, you got to follow through because consistency is the key. And by the way, I just need to say this, that if parents want to read more about this, there's a terrific book called The Parents Handbook that was written by Don Dinkmeyer and Gary McKay. And it's a terrific book that contains all this information we're talking about today and tons of other stuff as well.
Wonderful. Yeah. I always learn so much from you. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you for having me.
Rob Robinson. We love having you. And
Thanks.
We'll have all of your tips on our website later today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.